Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am a settler speaking to you from Toronto, though Business and Arts is a national organization with staff in many different territories across this land. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat people, Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. By saying the names of its original keepers, we remember that this territory continues to be subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee confederacies and the Three Fire Confederacy of the Anishinaabe to peacefully share and care for the resources across the Great Lakes. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. Today's session will include the latest insights from the Arts Response Tracking Survey, also known as ARTS. This project is a partnership between Business and Arts, the National Arts Centre, and Nanos Research, which began in May of 2020. Through quarterly surveys of over 1,000 Canadian culture goers, our aim has been to provide the arts sector with data and analysis to inform your decision-making, to be more adaptable and responsive to an ever-changing landscape. A big thank you to the Speaker Series presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada. I'd also like to thank supporters Irfan Raji and Camdo for the support of arts. The full Arts Response Tracking Survey report is now available in both English and French on our website. This edition of the survey was in the field in late October. We are happy to have ASL interpretation for today's session. Auto-generated English and French captions are also available in your control panel. Briefly before we begin, I'd also like to mention that we have opened nominations last week for the 2025 Business and Arts Awards. Find out about nominating an innovative partnership or arts champion at our website. The link will be in the chat. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box and vote for the ones you think are most relevant. The session is scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes to give us ample time for questions. So now we will start today's session with a presentation of the research findings by Nick Nanos. As the Chief Data Scientist at Nanos Research, Nick has led thousands of research projects in Canada and around the world, ranging from market studies, customer satisfaction tracking, creative testing and program development, and reputation management. Rick has worked alongside many arts and cultural organizations, including the Ontario Arts Council, BC Arts, and a variety of museum and art gallery institutions. So welcome again to Nick Nanos.
Thanks, Aubrey. I'm going to share my screen with the latest, to walk through the latest numbers that we have for the project that we do for Business in the Arts and the National Arts Centre. So we have, if I could just, maybe I can scoop myself, Aubrey, in terms of the results. We have a call to action and we have good news. How's that? So I think that's pretty good when it comes to the donation front. And you'll see, I'll just scoop myself. The call to action is that we need to do a better job at asking people to donate. The good news is that that when we look at some of the historical trends, that it looks like people are opening their wallet a little more than they were in the past couple of years. So let's unpack some of the data. We're going to talk about attendance, donations, drivers of donations, and how we can increase donations and impact arts and culture organization impact on the community. So, you know, the thing is if you look in the bottom left in terms of share, you know, you can see that, you know, we only get about 12 out of every $100 of the wallet of a culture goer and the donations that they make writ large. And it speaks to the fact, not to sound like a broken record, but I think I said this before, we need to ask and keep asking for donations from our arts and culture goers. This will be even more striking when we go through some of the other numbers. It just speaks to, yes, it's a very competitive area, but there obviously is an opportunity to increase our proportion or share of the wallet. You know, the interesting thing, the median expected donation for 2024 is $120. Back in 2022, just coming off of the pandemic, the expected donation was $100. So that's the positive movement that we've seen. And that positive movement has kind of cut across all the demographics. It isn't concentrated in one area. The other thing that we usually see that, the prairies has an above average likelihood. If you are an arts and culture goer in the prairies, more likely to report that you're expecting to donate in 2024 compared to the Canadian average. The other thing I'd like to say is you might be asking, for those of you that are really into stats, Nick, why didn't you report on the average? Why are you reporting on the median in this report? Well, as you might expect, we hit someone in the prairies who said that the arts and culture goer who said that they were expected to donate $10,000. There we go. They would said that they expect to donate $10,000 to an arts and culture organization this year. The likelihood of us hitting this person is not very likely, but as a result, when we initially cut the numbers, it's kind of like, wow, those prairie numbers look really good. And then we realized there was one person who said that they were expecting to make a $10,000 donation. So the long and the short, when it comes to the profile or the structure of donations, we have to ask for more and get more of that wallet. But that it looks like as we're entering an area, if you remember in the last couple of years, I've always been talking about how fragile people are about the economy. Interest rates were going up. I think with interest rates going down and the mood in terms of the economy improving, it doesn't mean that it's going to be good, but improving, perhaps, the coming year will be better than the previous year. And this goes back to, I talked about ask, and keep asking. Only 1/3 of arts and culture goers even remember ever being asked by an organization to donate to them. And I think this is one of the things that we have to really keep in mind. The other thing is when we ask about potential strategies to increase donations among those individuals who say that they are already giving to arts and culture organizations, you can see 4 responses, but realistically 3 buckets. About 1/3 or thereabouts, 30%, basically say if they knew that it was needed for something, if there's an immediate need, they would step up to the plate and donate even more than they're currently. About 1 out of every 5 or thereabouts basically say they're tapped out. They've already given as much as they can. And then the rest, you can see another 26% basically need to be persuaded how it might be used, or they want to learn more about the arts and culture organizations. But my key takeaway here is that you have to think of only 1 out of every 4 are tapped out. 30% just, they just basically need to be asked or told what immediate need there is that they should be supporting from a donation perspective. When it comes to motivators, and we had a long list of motivators, that's why this adds up to more than 100, because people could select as many as they wanted to. You can see that there's a top tier, basically a 3-way tie for the top tier of drivers for donating to arts and culture. And they include the cause, wanting to support artists, and the impact on the community. Also wanting to give back scored well, still 4 out of every 10 arts and culture goers identified that as what would motivate them to give. But I kind of see this as if I may suggest, a mix and match. There's no cookie cutter solution to how you engage your donors, but you can see that using these types of words in terms of believing in the cause and supporting artists and the impact on the community and giving back, that this particular kind of configuration is much more likely to drive donations. The other thing is, and this is also another data point where we saw some interesting movement, is that, when we ask people about culture goers, what the biggest impact of arts and cultural organizations on your community, you can see uplifting people or adding to the quality of life, or mental health betterment scores at the very top. And the other thing is that's up, that 23% is up 9 percentage points since 2023. Obviously, still things like cultural awareness and promoting culture and advancing a sense of belonging and straight up entertainment are important. But you can see this whole idea of uplifting people and communities and adding to quality of life and mental health betterment still tracking quite well. This is my last slide. the key takeaway here is, we report on this every wave, is as we kind of are transitioning to, why don't we call it a little more chilly weather? You can see that the outdoor events, at least the frequency of outdoor events, is actually trending down a little bit, as it probably should. But, steady state for the rest. So, Aubrey, before I throw it back to you, key takeaways, call to action, ask, please. Not enough people recall even being asked. Second, it looks like there could be a little bit of a positive lift. And, you might not think that it's significant, but better than negative pressure on people donating to arts and culture organizations, and also a greater focus on the impact and role of arts and culture organizations on quality of life and that kind of stuff. So that's it for me, Aubrey. I will throw it back to you, and I will be, I won't use the word lurk, but I guess I've just used the word lurk. I will be lurking in the chat, answering questions to anyone who has questions about the research or ideas about new questions, and I'll be there to respond. Okay, see you.
Thank you, Nick. Always a great summary of that research. Again, the reports with further detail are all available on our website in French and English. It is really encouraging to see a small boost in donations this year. In preparation for this session, I also took a look at CADAC data, which is reported by all arts organizations receiving core funding from the Canada Council. And CADAC is showing that total private sector revenue has returned to pre-pandemic levels and is up a modest 3.1% in the 2023-24 fiscal year over the previous year. And drilling down into this category, you can look at just individual and corporate donations is also up a little less, 2.3% year over year. So the picture is starting to improve. I would say there is a reason for some cautious optimism on the donation front. So with that, let me introduce our panelists and get their take. First up, we have Mark Turner, who is the CEO and creative producer of the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra. Under his leadership, the orchestra has seen transformational change to become one of the most innovative and progressive orchestras in the country. The SSO's dedication and passion for sharing music with everyone in their community is a trademark of their desire to help define the modern era of music. Mark spearheaded the launch of the SSO's streaming platform, concertstream.tv. The platform has brought the SSO to more than 600,000 homes across the world. So welcome, Mark. We also have Julie Fiorini, who is the General Manager, Donor Services, Brand Marketing at CanadaHelps, brings a diverse background in marketing, communications, and fundraising to support Canadians on their philanthropic journey and drive much-needed donations to charities that are working to make our world better. Julie's experience is in the nonprofit sector and has centered on causes she's passionate about, covers both the client and agency side. Julie has worked with charities such as Make-A-Wish Canada, Sick Kids Hospital, and the Heart and Stroke Foundation to elevate their brands and advance their missions. And she has also collaborated with a wide range of charity clients, including the Canadian Cancer Society, Kids Help Phone, and Doctors Without Borders. Welcome to Julie. And last but not least, we have Jennifer Matotek, who serves as the Executive Director of Art Windsor-Essex, formerly known as the Art Gallery of Windsor, since April 2020. She's held curatorial and administrative positions at the Dunlop Art Gallery, Toronto International Film Festival, the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, and the Art Gallery of Hamilton. She's also curated numerous exhibitions for galleries and artist-run centers across Canada. And she also has worked as a video artist herself, which has been shown internationally, and her writing has been published widely. So welcome to you, Jennifer. Great. Okay, so a little bit of positive news. Julie, I'm wondering if it aligns with what you're seeing more broadly through CanadaHelps data of the charitable sector. Are you seeing a slight upswing in giving data, and or is there some factors here that are just at play in the arts?
Great, thanks for the question, Aubrey, and hi everyone. Good afternoon. Great to be here. If I may, I thought I want to start with some high-level observations at the macro level from what we're seeing at CanadaHelps. And for those who aren't aware, we produce a report annually called the Giving Report. And so if you haven't already downloaded the 2024 edition, I think it will be coming up in the chat. I really encourage you to download the report because it's got some really interesting insights around donor behavior and you know what we're seeing. In terms of this year's Giving Report, we highlighted that for the 11th consecutive year, fewer Canadians are actually giving across the board, not just to arts charities, but charities across the board. And this is based on, as many of you know, this is based on tax filer data that we can get from the Canada Revenue Agency. And it's important to note, as we talk about tax filer data, that always lags a couple of years behind. So it only takes into account donations that tax receipts have actually been claimed for and used by donors. And so it's quite limiting in terms of, you know, how other people donate, how they give through crowdfunding or mutual aid networks or other private acts of generosity. So I just want to put a caveat there. But when we do look at tax filer data, the donation rate has basically gone down from 23.4% back in 2010, and we're now down to 17.7% as of 2021 tax filer data. And it's concerning. It's definitely concerning for all of us in the charitable sector. But I do want to highlight a really bright spot that we see at CanadaHelps in that although fewer Canadians appear to be giving, those who do give are giving more, and in particular, online. And so what we've seen from 2019 to 2023, donations made through CanadaHelps have almost doubled. And so that's a very positive sign. And in particular, where we've seen growth is with monthly giving, rising about 11% alone last year in 2023. And another area that is growing exponentially are securities donations. And when I say securities, I mean stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And we process securities donations that can be made to any charity across Canada on CanadaHelps. And we are seeing huge growth there, very much in line with the markets, which, as we heard last week after the US election, really had this upward trajectory. And so we are seeing that a lot of charities are benefiting from, you know, those Canadians who have securities and are willing to, you know, make the donation to charity and hopefully save on some of their capital gains. Now, getting down back to the arts and culture sector, in terms of the share of donations that arts and culture charities have compared to total donations processed through CanadaHelps, we actually only process about 1.5% of donations that are made to arts and culture charities. So it's quite a small amount. So I just wanted to, you know, put that out there. And we're actually going to be releasing some interesting data in the coming weeks. So I don't want to give too much away at this point, but I can tell you that CanadaHelps has been seeing a similar uptick in both the number of donations made to arts and culture charities, as well as the average gift amount. So it's very much in line with the research that Nick just presented. And the last point I'll just make is that in research that we've done at CanadaHelps around causes that Canadians care about and those that they want to support, it's interesting because arts and culture doesn't always necessarily rank near the top in terms of, you know, causes people want to donate to. Obvious things like health, social services, even animal charities, those are the ones that sort of naturally seem to rise to the top. but I think there is absolutely a surge in interest in supporting arts. And I think as we get through this conversation, we're going to talk about like what some of those factors are that seem to be making a difference.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. That really takes me to my next question, which was that giving wallet percentage, $12 out of 100 going to the arts compared to other sectors. But meanwhile, the respondents said that they would increase their gift if there was an immediate need or crisis. Over the past year, we have actually seen many arts organizations, as well as other charities outside of the arts, that have gone public that they were in a crisis situation and have asked for help from donors. Others have held back, didn't want to be open about those financial challenges, maybe from a worry that donors were skittish about giving to organizations that are in trouble. So let's unpack the pros and cons of making a crisis appeal. Maybe let's start with you, Mark.
Yeah, I think we actually did a crisis appeal about 7, 8, 10 years ago with the SSO. And the focus for us was not so much about the crisis, but about the vision beyond the crisis. We really leaned into, we need your help now because we have a goal, big lofty goals for the future that you can support, but we can't get there without getting through the hard times. And that really resonated with donors. And they still talk about that sense of giving towards the future and the momentum of how they could support the organization long term. It was less about giving directly to the crisis and more about giving to the vision of our future.
That's really smart. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at the data and then going back and sort of looking at what happened when we did, a crisis appeal during COVID. And definitely what we saw was more revenue, for example, with the crisis appeal. I think it was about 30% more than a typical sort of appeal. I think there's a lot of conversation around, do you say you're in a crisis situation or not? I know Michelle at the CEO of the Canada Council recently did an open letter about this. And I think it's important to be honest with your supporters about what's happening at your organization. I think that so much of, especially major gift donors, it's about relationships, it's about trust. And I don't know that it benefits anyone from being, like, if you're being dishonest about what's happening at your organization. But having said that, at the same time, when you have crisis after crisis, that does cause some fatigue in people. So I can kind of see both sides of it, especially as we're sort of heading into a recession situation. But yeah, because trust is so important and where that comes to play, I think this is definitely where you want to connect with the people who are excited about your mission, can visibly see the great work that you're doing, in your community, how well you are stewarding their gifts. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be an either or. And I think the idea of, is this about crisis or is this about urgency? I think the conversation that we can have, I feel like positioning your appeal so that there's an urgency to your need, and because of the impact that it has, and there's something going on in your community that needs to be dealt with, or I think that is something that you can do that is not necessarily a crisis, but framing it as urgency and impact, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really important nuance, because you can really only cry wolf once. So if you're saying we're in a crisis, you can't then come back 6 months later or a year later and say we're in crisis. But you can continue to communicate urgency over time. So, which really does lead me to my next question. When an organization is doing well, such as both Arts Windsor-Essex and the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra, how do you compel donors that there is a critical need to give now when there isn't the same relative urgency as, for food security, health, or other kind of crises in our communities?
I don't mind answering that because it kind of flows from what I was saying before. So in our community in Windsor-Essex, there is a really significant urgency, I would say, to the work that we're doing. I know across the province, we know that funding to arts education is dwindling, and that arts and culture institutions are really well positioned to fill that gap. But specific to our region, we have some of the highest rates of childhood poverty in the country. So a lot of our appeals are around helping us maintain accessible points of entry to art and artists, to arts education. So while the messaging is not, I would say, like, our organization's in crisis, it's more, there's urgent work that needs to be done in our community, and we are very well positioned to deal with that. So I would say, impact stories have been very effective in terms of our building long-term relationships with our major gifts donors. I kind of feel like when you do the impact work, you're playing a long game as opposed to like the shorter game that can happen with a crisis appeal. And I've definitely seen an increase in the number of gifts that we receive, going in that direction as we move away from COVID crisis to, more regular operations. And one thing that my organization has done is we've been working really hard to do a lot of story gathering. So really, as part of our culture of philanthropy, every staff member, every board member, every volunteer working really hard to gather those stories and anecdotes from people who engage and people who are impacted by the programming that we do. I think having that qualitative feedback as well as quantitative feedback is really helpful in terms of positioning your message.
Yeah. And Mark, how about for you?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Jennifer, about relationships, because that's a key part of it. For us, it's the urgent call is less about we need it right now, and it's more about leaning into our mission and trying to find ways to get those donors to understand the relationship they have to the mission as well. We also, post-pandemic, have really looked at growing our donor base to the next generation, to bring more people in, because we need to make sure that those people understand. We may not be as easy to give to, as Julie was pointing out with some of the other charitable offerings out there, but without their support, the arts can't thrive and flourish. And when you start to talk to those people about the relationships they have, particularly, we found that really resonates with people around music and what music means to them in their life and what it's meant to them throughout their entire life, their kids, their grandkids. They start to think about the ways that their money can then be used. Sort of like I often talk about they're kind of spending their money with us rather than making a donation. We talk a lot about investing in our organization, and that their gift is an investment in what they enjoy, what they want to believe in. And so we have then turned that around and made sure that we communicate about the mission and make sure that they have that connection to it. Without that, I think there's a lot of opportunity when you're in an urgent call to also get the messaging wrong. And so there are moments where people will go out in crisis. Like you say, you can only cry wolf once. And if you do it wrong, that's an even harder thing to recover from. We always, even in the pandemic, we around our table with the staff talk about how do we make sure we're using the right words, the right language. And it's not putting a negative spin on the issues we're dealing with, but rather looking at the opportunities that we can use to come out of those crises. So even now, without crises in our day-to-day work or our operations, we still lean into those opportunities for people.
That's really great. I thought a surprising insight, at least for me, was that only 32% of culture goers recall even being asked to give to the arts. And most fundraisers will tell you that if you aren't asked for a donation, you're unlikely to give one. So I feel like I look around and I see there's a lot of hesitation in the arts about making that request for donation, or nervousness that we might be doing it too often. We do hear about donor fatigue across the charitable sector. So can each of you reflect a bit on the finding the right moment to ask for a donation to the right donors? And what's that sweet spot of frequency?
I'm happy to start on that one.
Go with you, Mark.
We ask all the time. We ask all the time. If you phone into our office, one of the things on the phone tree is, would you like to make a donation today? It's a banner on the website. It's on pretty much every email communication. It's on social media. It's at every concert. We have banners in the lobby, speeches from stage. We are constantly asking. We decided a few years ago we wanted to have a culture of asking so that it wasn't awkward when it came up. Because like you say, Aubrey, it can be really awkward or uncomfortable. When you make it part of your standard culture, it's not awkward. And you know, I'm hoping none of my donors were answering in the remainder of that, not the 32%, because we are constantly to the point where I sometimes feel like we over ask, but it normalizes it and it makes it part of their experience with our organization.
Mhm. Julie, I see a lot of appeals in my mailbox from charitable organizations outside of the arts. They are asking all the time. Can you maybe reflect more broadly?
Yes, absolutely. I would say I can't really say that there's a one size fits all when it comes to frequency. I think every organization really has to evaluate, you know, what makes the most sense for them and their donor base. My recommendation is always to embrace technology and a digital first mindset to really help you, first of all, have a pulse on what's working and what's not working in terms of your communication and fundraising efforts, but then also keep track of donor fatigue through like even just little things like if you're sending out regular email campaigns and your open rate starts to dwindle or your click-through rates start to dwindle, you sort of have an understanding that, you know, maybe you have to look at frequency and also content to make sure that you're connecting with donors. I would also say, you know, if you can, and I understand every organization has different sort of capabilities, but if you're able to segment your donors and personalize campaigns accordingly based on what their individual preferences are and what they've responded to in the past, that will help you, you know, sort of target the most appropriate message, frequency, and channel for each of your donor segments, which will hopefully result in you know, better conversions. And then the last thing I would say is just always show appreciation. Thank them for their gift. That is like so important. I think all of us as fundraisers know, like we have to say thank you and provide updates on the gift that they made after your last ask. So make sure that they see the tangible impact their support has made and will continue to make. So that will hopefully keep them engaged and continue their support.
Yeah, that is super key for getting repeat donors. You have to keep thanking them and keeping them informed. Mark already touched on the importance of leaning into his mission, and we saw in the data that purpose or mission was the most important motivation. But we also saw wanting to support artists or creators jumped up on that list. So Jennifer, how is Windsor-Essex, Arts Windsor-Essex communicating that mission and illustrating impact, especially where you're supporting artists?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, the Community Foundation actually every year does a survey called Vital Signs, and that's really where we hear in the community what people's concerns are around arts and culture. And you know, one of the biggest one that comes up every year, this year it was 42% of respondents, was trying to see an increase in the number of arts and cultural opportunities for those wanting to pursue a career in the arts. You know, we've heard over and over that art education and access to the arts is a big concern for our donors. You know, you see at universities, art departments shrinking. So although, you know, recognize it's not a concern for everyone, it is a concern, you know, for many. I would say for us, our donor interest tends to be a little bit more on the impact of the work that artists do for the community and for the public. So while I see the survey data says, oh, people are excited about like supporting art and artists, I love to see that. But when I do donor surveys and talk to our donors about, you know, what's motivating, especially their major gifts, a lot of times it's what impact is the work that we're doing having on the community. So that's actually good news for us because our mission is to inspire growth through the power of art. So actually embedded in our mission is that idea of art is powerful and it has an impact. So yeah, we are not kind of about like, oh, we're doing art for art's sake. It's really emphasizing the power that art has, the impact that it has, And I think actually making that shift for us has been pretty big, really centering the audience in that way, but it's resonating and it's working as a strategy for communications.
The report found that 23% of culture goers said that the biggest impact arts and culture has on their community is uplifting people and enhancing quality of life. And that's up 9% since last year. Why do you think this shift is happening, and how can arts organizations really harness this growing recognition to engage future or for new donors? Mark?
It's really interesting data, and Julie, I appreciate your comment about being able to mine your data and know your data. We've seen quite a growth in kind of that new generation of donors. We went after it and we sort of looked at how to connect with those folks, but we did that also with our programming. So for us, again, I'm a broken record when it comes to the mission and vision of the organization, but for us, it really does start at the programming level, and therefore, if you can get them in, they are going to support us in some way or another. And we were able to see that quality of life has become a really interesting conversation. Prior to the pandemic, I don't know that was as much of a conversation with our donors as it is now. I have donors who say to me, I used to watch the news before going to bed. I can't watch the news before going to bed anymore. I listen to music. And they come to concerts for all sorts of reasons. It's that opportunity to know why they're coming to our programming, connecting with us in that way, so that they can also then feel connected to their gift, making an impact in that way. And it's been really interesting to see the growth of the younger donors. We've seen an uptick in the mid to late 20s, early 30s, and some of it's a very good giving size. Some of it's very meager, but they're giving and they're committed. And for us, that was a big part of why we wanted to say, how do we make an impact in your life?
Yeah, that's really great. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts about that too?
I mean, I would say, speaking on the demographic piece, we're definitely seeing a larger number of youth in the gallery. Part of that is our rebrand and our programming and the whole secret sauce that goes with, trying to transform yourself into an art gallery for the 21st century. But yeah, I'm definitely seeing a younger group. Actually, our new donor acquisition rate is pretty high. It's about 60%. I think there's good and bad things about that, depending how you look at it. But I would say, there's more gifts, but they're smaller gifts for the most part. And yeah, I would say it's largely from an under 55 demographic. So I think one good thing that we did coming out of COVID was actually we dropped our membership prices and streamlined paid membership types. And I think one thing that I've actually seen happen is we're seeing a lot of donations with membership purchases, which is interesting. So there's some people that, used to pay the higher amount for membership. Now they see they're paying a lower amount, but they're making a donation on top. So it's going to a different level. And I don't know, I think that's been an interesting shift for us. And I'm really monitoring closely kind of what is happening. Is there a correlation with the number of gifts going along with the increase in memberships that we're seeing because we've dropped the price? I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm sorry, I don't have a solid answer yet.
Do you have anything that corresponds in terms of subscriptions, Mark?
Well, it's interesting. We are actually working right now to find a way to make it easier for those folks who do, because when I first started, subscriptions were still paper and pen, and they came into the office, and now it's all done online. And like you said, Julie, we need to actually develop those ways. So almost, I would guess 90% of our giving is currently online, but being able to give simply when you're buying a ticket, when you're buying your subscription online is something we're actually trying to figure out in our next generation of website and user interface, because they do want to give. And if you make it easier for them in that subscription process, there's lots of opportunities there. It's interesting. Our subscriptions, of course, dipped in the pandemic. They've grown back up to where they were pre-pandemic. We had been growing for years in that, and it's now trying to understand also what time of year those subscribers want to give. Historically, the holiday season at the SSO has never been the time to give. The end of year letter is sort of a nice Christmas letter. A thank you. It's less about giving and more about just connecting with them, and understanding when those subscribers want to make their gift has been a big part of it too. So trying to think through those processes about the future and capture the best opportunities.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Julie, do you have anything to reflect on demographics with all of your intel? It's interesting, both Jennifer and Mark are seeing younger donors with smaller amounts. That actually is opposite what we saw on the Arts Response Tracking Survey, but it's still great to see cultivating that next generation of donors.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, I think we, not to dampen the mood here, but I think we need to take some of the self-reported data with a little bit of a grain of salt, especially when, again, if you look at that tax filer data, the percentage of younger donors, based on the 2022 tax filer data, shows that only about 10% of Canadians aged 25 to 34 actually claimed charitable donations on their tax returns. But that doesn't mean they don't give. So I think what is happening is a very interesting shift in that younger generations don't necessarily give to get a tax receipt, right? Like that's not exactly what they're after. They're after the experience sometimes. They're after being able to say that, yes, what they did, whether they volunteered their time or they were able to, donate something physical instead, actually had an impact on their community. And so I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind when we think about how to engage younger generations. But what we've highlighted in CanadaHelps giving reports over the years is, excuse me, what we call the giving gap, where we're seeing this notable trend amongst younger Canadians just donating less than previous generations did at the same age range. And so, we're obviously, every charity, not just CanadaHelps, is concerned about this, diminishing engagement of younger Canadians in charitable giving. But as I mentioned, I think we just need to change our definition of giving and expand it beyond looking at tax filer data, because we know, like, people are donating to crowdfunding campaigns all the time, and that is just simply not included when we look at things like tax filer data. So I would just say we have to get better data sources so that we can get a holistic picture.
Yeah, we have a number of questions coming in the Q&A box. But before I get to that, I just wanted to ask each of you for a specific example of an innovative approach to fundraising or a success story that you'd like to share. Jennifer, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, this is more of a blanket thing, but I would say actually our rebrand was very successful. I would say that, changing our name and our mission and brand in 2022 with the rollout of our new strategic plan, it's just moved everything in a very positive direction. So we're still, trending at about 79% over pre-COVID in terms of admissions, memberships, private support. It's all pretty much in that range. So I think that, if you're able to articulate how you are something organization doing important, impactful work worthy of investment, with a mission that's exciting and a brand that people want to be a part of, I would definitely say brand is important. It's something that supports marketing, but also fundraising and general public support.
Mark?
Yeah,
I have a couple of,
go ahead, Julie.
Sorry, I was going to just use a couple of recent success stories. I think Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony is a recent one, and I think they can add the link to the chat, where just over a year ago they declared bankruptcy, and now, just a year later, they have announced their return from bankruptcy, and what an incredible success story for them. And Canadian Stage is another one where they have announced that they've recently eliminated their debt for the very first time since they were founded in 1987. And so, being able to say that some of the activities they undertook, like they streamlined their season to fewer productions, they channeled their resources, differently, extended their show runs to reach more people. they attracted new patrons. So they just had to do things a little bit differently, and it resulted in them being able to come off with a surplus. So it's pretty amazing.
It is a great accomplishment. Mark?
Yeah, and you know, for us, we developed a very new audience to be in the hall with us post-pandemic. The streaming that we did, most of the new people coming to us post-pandemic, their first financial transaction with us was through the streaming. And so having new people in the room made us think actually about why they would want to give to us. It took away that heritage conversation, and picking up on something Julie said earlier, we thank them in a different way. So our thank you letters are not very dry and formal and boring. They're pretty casual, and we talk to them about how much it means that they actually gave to us. It seems like a small innovation, but I have heard from donors of every single level, from you know, lead gift, large gifts to you know, $10 gifts, saying they felt like the letter they got in the mail, the card they got in the mail was so personal, and it was so excited that they felt really recognized in a different way. And even, you know, we have a gala next week. Accessibility is something I think a lot about, particularly for orchestras. It's something I think we have historically always stumbled over. And our gala next week is free. So all the donors are coming for free. We're putting on a concert for them with surprise guest artists, and the donors who you know, gave lots and lots of money last year were able to give tickets away to school programs, to different community groups, to engage people who hadn't necessarily given, who may not even have the capacity to give, but they're coming to be a part of this giving back to the donors. And so I know when we first started pitching these free events as recognition and donor and gala events, we had people saying to me like, no, you're supposed to make money on a gala. And for us, we actually went the opposite way, and it's actually just about giving them something to say thanks.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to start taking some questions from the audience. The first one we have asks if there's a breakdown of donation data by urban and rural, and I can already say no. In the Arts Response Tracking Survey, we don't have that breakdown. However, both Saskatoon and Windsor are not major urban centers. They're sort of large centers in their regions. And so just going to tilt this question a little bit to reflect on how do you see the trends in those kind of regional areas as opposed to major urban centers?
Yeah, you know, I have to say, we sort of don't think a whole lot about those types of trends in how we approach things. I have a belief that orchestras, maybe all arts organizations, have this hyper local attitude or opportunity for them. And so we really do actually, instead of focusing on some of the trends, we look at our own trends. And so, you know, I know that across the country, people in their 20s, 30s are not necessarily giving as much, but we've been trending away from that, and we wanted to be able to focus on those things. So it changes the way we think about communicating. We want to make sure that we're communicating with our patrons where they're at and how they need to be communicated to. So I don't really spend as much time thinking about those trends as something that governs how we do it. We kind of set our path forward and move.
Yeah, we're in a unique position being a border city. You know, we're the largest and oldest public art gallery several hours away from London and the GTA, but you know, being right on the border with Detroit, when you look at the metro area, we're almost like Montreal. Of course, half the people need like a passport to come visit us. Well, 3/4. But anyway, and actually, I will say it makes the conversation almost a little bit difficult sometimes, I would say, with public funders in that way, and I wish it wouldn't. You know, there's always that question of like, how does this benefit Ontarians? How does this, you know, benefit Canadians? Like the narrative is very much around the province and Canada. And I just feel like our narrative is so much broader than that, especially when we're talking about, you know, Indigenous, Canadian, historical art mandate. You know, people in Detroit don't say I'm going to Windsor, they say I'm going to Canada. So I think it's really important to think about the role that we really play in being, for a lot of Americans, their first or only impression of Canadian art. And I think that's something very worthy of investment from a cultural diplomacy perspective. But yeah, so when we look at at trends, we really do look at our region, kind of like Mark was saying, like uniquely, just given that we are so uniquely situated right next to a large American neighbor, but otherwise quite far away from other Canadian urban cities.
We have a question here saying that we have seen several festivals asking volunteers to provide a donation. I've heard from a few volunteers of these organizations that they believe they are giving their time and are annoyed by this ask. What are your thoughts about asking volunteers to donate? I think that personally, there's actually a lot of intersection between volunteers and donors, that these are the people who care deeply about your organizations, no matter which way that they're giving. So I think that there's no harm, but go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I don't think there's a harm either. Like I said, we ask everybody and we ask a lot, and it just becomes part of our culture. Now, I'm not going to make it a requirement for them to be a volunteer and give, but I also think if you don't ask volunteers, you're taking away the opportunity for them to support you through a gift. That's one of the things I've learned is so many people actually want to support you. They do want to be asked. They feel really honored to be asked to help in your vision and your goals. And so assuming that volunteers are solely there to give of their time, that's an amazing thing in and of itself. But it may also be a little rude to not ask them at all, because they are people who care about you deeply. So you have to do it carefully, but I think there's a way to do it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think if you're truly trying to build a culture of philanthropy within your organization, which I think all of us are trying to do, and even across the sector, I think we should all be, trying to work on that culture of philanthropy. Of course, that means asking everyone for gifts at every level of the organization. And yeah, annually when we work on our internal appeal, we do approach and ask volunteers as a strategy. And, the worst thing someone will say is no. And I think, as Mark mentioned, there might be an assumption that, we're imposing, but I think most people honestly feel honored to, as Mark said, to be asked to be a part of the family, to be thought of as a philanthropic supporter, and to be approached. Yeah.
And it may not be no outright, it may just be no today. And
yeah,
so
not right now.
Not right now. Yeah. Julie, I don't think CanadaHelps really has data on volunteers, or am I incorrect?
No, you're correct. What I was just going to add, though, is don't forget about your boards, because they are your leadership volunteers. And I think absolutely, I think a lot of organizations feel sheepish about asking boards to donate, especially depending on what type of organization you are. But they should absolutely have a mandate to be donors and lead the charge. Like, volunteers are an organization's like brand ambassadors, and they're the ones who are going to tell the story of all the great work that's happening. And so don't hesitate to bring them on board as donors as well.
I think that is really true. Our board members are our biggest ambassadors, and you don't have to have a policy that they give a certain amount. We have 100% of our board give annually, but it is always within your means what is appropriate for you. And it also translates in board members then feeling more comfortable making asks to others, because they say, I support this organization and I'm asking you to do the same.
Yeah, Aubrey, we also have 100% board giving, and I think it's really important. It's difficult to have conversations with major gift donors sometimes. I've definitely had some of them ask, do you have 100% board giving? And obviously a lot of foundations won't even look at your application unless you can communicate how you have 100% board giving. It's really hard to make the argument that your organization is worthy of investment when you don't have that in place. And like you said, Aubrey, it doesn't have to be about like a certain amount, just whatever feels really meaningful to the person who's donating.
I echo that, Jennifer. We created a policy a few years ago that explored what board giving could look like. So in the board policy manual, we asked that people give to the capacity they can and make sure that we're one of their top 3 giving priorities. That was language that the board developed. It also allowed us to unhinge it from a dollar value. You know, that had sort of been, it wasn't a formal issue before I started at the SSO, but it was kind of informally expected. And so we really wanted to focus on, we want this to be a priority. And like you say, other donors need to know that your board has given at least something.
Agreed. We have a question here about outside of annual giving, what metrics are we seeing around major gifts in arts and culture? And Jennifer, you just mentioned approaching major donors from board members. So what are you using to measure? They're suggesting number of meetings a month, number of proposals, budget around individual gifts, etc.
Yeah, I mean, for us, so we're a small organization. It's me and my head of development, you know, talking to our major gift donors about the great work we're doing and the impact of gifts, things that we're able, you know, to make happen because of them. We try to make sure that we communicate a lot with our major gift donors. You know, we aim for about 7 touch points a year for each major donor. I don't know if we always get there. So I think sometimes we have more, sometimes we have less, you know, it really depends, but that's truly, you know, our goal for the size of the team. I think depending on your resources and how large your team is, you might be able to scale that differently. But for us, that's sort of where we're at right now. And, you know, when we talk to donors in our donor surveys, you know, 9 out of 10 are really happy with their gift. They feel like they're being communicated effectively to about the impact of their gift. So I would always recommend as well donor surveys. If you're not sure that people understand how their gift is being used, that they feel appropriately, you know, thanked and appreciated, and just to find out, you know, how would you like to be acknowledged? How would you like to see impact reported differently? When you do a donor survey, get some great information that way.
I'm really hesitant to use the word major gifts because I am terrified of someone who can afford to give $50 feeling that that's not a major gift. So we, you know, internally we talk about big gifts and smaller gifts, but we try to avoid the language around major gift. Now we have technically, you know, if you want to use that term, we've grown our major gifts quite significantly in the last few years. But I think, you know, and as I said, I find the accessibility portion of what we do, it's expensive to produce live arts events, to run galleries. It's becoming expensive to attend those things, although way cheaper than Taylor Swift concerts. Just want to say that. But I also don't want to then alienate someone who can give. You know, I remember telling you, Aubrey, about a story. We had a young man who came in. He's a teenager. He came into the office. We had a matching campaign that was ending on May 31st last year. He came in and he gave, you know, like $52.30, and that was a major gift to him. And he, you know, one of the first things he asked was, "Is this going to be matched?" That to me, you know, I realized that the question wasn't about this, but I also want to not get too hung up on the fact that we only spend time with those donors who are giving us lots of money. Sure, they need some attention and stuff, but so does everyone else. I think, you know, the opportunity when those smaller gifts come through the door, the smaller cash value, that doesn't mean they're not major.
It was major to him.
Huge.
Yeah. And that's pretty powerful. And actually, that's a really good segue to this next question, because they're asking about advice specifically to engage donors that want to support youth programming. Now, they say, obviously, young people are unable to donate themselves, but that's incorrect based on your experience that you just had. Who do you find are the best funding sources to target for youth programming?
Yeah, I don't mind answering that. I find that community foundations and family foundations in your area can often be the best resource, your best ally, your best partner in trying to do this kind of work, because they're often on the ground with you, seeing what's needed in the community and identifying how you can sort of fill a gap. So in my experience, that's been quite successful.
I think the other thing, you talked about it earlier, Jennifer, talking to your donors about, you know, a survey or just casually talking to them, finding out what their motivator is. You probably have donors in your midst who, if you ask them, what do you want to give to? What do you feel passionate about? I always try to make sure that if I'm asking those questions, they're talking more than I am. I want to hear from them about what makes them tick and why they want to give, you know, what pulls at their heartstrings. And so I'm sure there are people in all of our midst who actually do want to give, particularly to youth programming, because that's where they fell in love with the arts.
Yeah.
And I would just add, if you are able to, pay for the license fees for some of these products, like Imagine Canada has Grant Connect. There's also another product called Foundation Search, and you can get access to some really great funding opportunities through there. I mean, it does involve an annual licensing fee, but you can always negotiate and see what, comes up. And the other thing too is that you can also, nothing is stopping you from looking at other arts organizations that are similar to yours and sort of seeing what types of organizations are supporting them, whether it's corporate support, whether it's, private foundations, that type of thing. And that'll sort of help, tweak some ideas there.
Yeah, I agree. I always look in the program and on the giving wall to see who's there. It's actually important research. We have a couple questions about communications tools. The first one was saying a recent e-blast kicking off their fundraising campaign resulted in 1% unsubscribe rate from their mailing list. They didn't think it looked good, but because they're also trying to increase their e-blast frequency for the campaign. How do I justify the decrease in subscribers?
I think 1% is so minimal.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be worried about it unless you're hitting 8 to 10%. Don't worry about it. You're going to have people unsubscribe anyway. Hilariously, one of our an individual who gives one of the largest gifts to the organization annually unsubscribed from our emails. And it's not that they don't care. She just doesn't want emails. She doesn't want the MailChimp coming in. She wants a personal email, sure, and she's going to give her gift. But so, I don't worry about that as much. You feel like, oh, I don't get to communicate with those people. Maybe you are already. They're seeing you at your events or your other things. Or maybe those people weren't going to be communicated about anyway, and you don't want to spend your time trying to chase those down.
Yeah, I wouldn't be afraid of that either. As much as, I'm saying like, oh, we rebranded and everything was amazing. It was. Sometimes you lose people when you change your focus, your direction, your brand. And similar in this situation, you're trying to build a culture of philanthropy by sending more e-blasts out about how you're a worthy cause to donate to. If 1 out of 100 people decide that that's not why they signed up for your email list, that's okay. You still have 99 out of 100 people that are willing and happy to receive those emails. And I guess the only suggestion I would make is to really look at the e-blasts that you send out and are you offering something of value? Because I find sometimes if you're sending an e-blast out, say every week, and all it is promotion for what you're doing and nothing else, that makes it less openable for people. So that's something I would kind of think about.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jennifer, in that you don't always have to worry about those folks you've lost. We had a donor who gave us a very large annual gift for years. She was a former board member, longtime volunteer, and she said to me a year ago, "I don't feel like the SSO is for me anymore." And I said to her, "I agree. It's really not. We're not like we used to be 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago. We have evolved with our city, with our community, and her giving changed, and we had to be okay with that because in the process of becoming the organization with the mission we wanted, we were able to gain other people who would give.
Yeah, so you may lose at 1%, but you might in fact gain 5% in the process of new people. Quick question, someone's asking about mail versus email. Is it still worth doing mail campaigns?
I mean, I would say yes. Our annual appeal that we do tends to be focused more on mailing, less on digital. We're looking at some different ways to do it. But I find, yeah, you should actually, I think you asked a question kind of earlier-ish about this. And we're shifting towards looking at doing appeals, not just annually, but twice a year. Historically, when I look in the past, pre-COVID. I know we're in a different world now. I don't always love looking back to pre-COVID, but when I look at pre-COVID and we did do 2 appeals a year, the overall revenue for the appeal and the number of donors was higher. So we're looking at doing that again this year and sort of seeing what happens. But I would say, yeah, still do a mailing.
think it's an and both. We do a mailing and then email follow-ups. And typically for us, our end of year letter goes out, I think, in a week. And it goes out in the mail, and it's kind of timed, and certain groups get one letter and certain donors get another letter. And then the emails come in follow-ups, and typically we give more information about what they can give directly to, or what their gift can do for us. That the letter in the mail inspires them. We want to make them feel like they're tug at their heartstrings, and then give them the details in emails, because that's such a critical. You have to get people as many times as possible before they'll give.
Yeah.
And I know I said earlier, like, embrace the digital first mindset, but I agree with Mark and Jennifer, like, mail, you can't substitute like a wonderful mail piece that has vibrant photographs and like just that detailed, personalized letter that can go to your donors. Like, there's nothing that can replace that. Now, I recognize cost is always an issue, but sometimes you can be creative around using 2-color instead of 4-color. You can, perhaps even mail a smaller subset of donors if you haven't already started coming up with like a mid-level donor program, which is, generally speaking, donors who are giving maybe $500 or more to your organization every year, then maybe think about perhaps only mailing them as a test and see how that goes. But I think, people are sort of saying direct mail is going the way of the dodo bird, but I think there's still very much a need for it, for sure, especially in the arts sector.
I think especially when it comes to saying thank you, there is nothing more touching than an actual handwritten thank you note.
It feels so special to get mail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one final question. AI is emerging as a powerful tool to enhance donor engagement and fundraising strategies. It's a little scary though for a lot of people. How can arts organizations harness AI to be better at fundraising?
I can answer this. We actually just we had a communication with a handful of donors from a segmented list that my fundraiser actually we created it in ChatGPT, and we edited it because it came out. But actually, it was a pretty good letter, and we had to personalize it a bit. But figuring out how to use the tools that are provided to us, I think, is an important part of it. It saves some time. Will we use it for major campaigns? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know yet, but I think it's a tool that is worth exploring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that we're using AI increasingly in our organization to automate certain tasks and to kind of, like Mark was suggesting, get to a starting point with something, because sometimes just starting is the most difficult part. So I definitely find AI useful for that. But at the same time, I really think actually the sector needs to develop some sector-wide ethical guidelines around the use of AI in the sector. It is something I'm really concerned about, and I'm really hoping that some organizations emerge as leaders in that area so that we're all using it ethically.
Julie, in terms of understanding data, how can AI help us?
Yeah, it's there's a lot to unpack there. That's probably going to have to be our next webinar, I think.
Yes, probably.
But I would just echo what Jennifer said. Like, using it responsibly and ethically is paramount, especially when it comes to the protection of personal information. And yeah, I honestly, I don't even know where to begin with this one. Curious if Mr. Nanos has a comment, if he's still on the line around that. But if I can also just take a second, someone asked a question about what I mentioned earlier. It was foundation search, and I was going to type it in, but I was a little too trigger happy, and I hit answer live. Sorry about that.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up there. Really dynamic and interesting conversation. Thank you so much. A big thank you to Nick Nanos, who has always provided insightful analysis of the data. A huge thank you to our panelists, Julie Fiorini, Mark Turner, and Jennifer Matotek, for contributing your insightful thoughts and reflections on the donor landscape right now. Thank you to the National Arts Centre and Nanos Research for continuing to be partners with us on the Arts Response Tracking Survey. Thank you to CAMDO and Irfan Raji, who are also continuing their support of this project. And finally, a big thank you to Power Corporation of Canada, presenting partner of the Business and Arts Speaker Series. Finally, a reminder that last week we opened nominations for the 2025 Business and Arts Awards, which is quite apropos for today's topic, since the awards are our way of recognizing the incredible contribution of philanthropists, sponsors, and champions of the arts. We have 4 awards now open for nominations until December 20th at businessandarts.org. We are looking for examples of innovative partnerships and remarkable art supporters, such as this year's corporate champions, who were the Manitoba Liquor and Lottery Corporation. They were recognized for their commitment to community enrichment and the advancement of the arts across Manitoba. Or another example is a partnership that transformed a particular community, such as this year's Community Impact Award recipients, which were Bury Down Paint and We Live Up Here Festival from Sudbury. Together, their creative partnership has resulted in the creation of over 100 murals and pieces of public art that have really transformed downtown Sudbury. So if you know of an incredible partnership, leader or organization championing arts in your area, we want to hear about them. The link to the nomination is in the chat. If you want to learn more about any other business and arts program or events, you can head to our website or follow us on social media. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day.